Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents Escape Artist, The 9 Lives of Harry Perry Robinson, by Joseph Mcaleer, narrated by Matthew Lloyd Davies. Author's Note: Harry Perry Robinson, as the listener will discover, wore many hats during his lifetime. He also used several variations of his 3-part name, which posed a genuine challenge during the research process. In print, either as the byline to one of his writings or a referenced subject in a letter or article, he could be identified as one of the following: Harry Robinson, H. P. Robinson, Harry P. Robinson, H. Perry Robinson, Perry Robinson, Harry Perry Robinson, or, after 1920, Sir Harry Perry Robinson, for the sake of simplicity and to distinguish him from his father and his 2 brothers. He will be known as Harry in this book. Preface. History is replete with individuals who led extraordinary and influential lives, yet who are largely unknown today. Harry Perry Robinson, 1859 to 1930, is one of these, and this book seeks to remedy that oversight. It's not simply the fact that Harry's role in major historical events on multiple continents, from the 1896 presidential election in the United States to the First World War and the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb, has been obscured, nor that through his extensive writings and observations, Harry validates the Tocqueville premise that the best impressions of a given country are offered by foreigners. Harry's life exemplifies these, but also offers an exciting personal story worthy of Horatio Alger. Here is one man's march through history, a near-epic story of a spectacular rise from an Anglo-Indian childhood to American tycoon, a dramatic fall from grace, and an unexpected ascent again as a globe-trotting journalist for the London Times. This entertaining saga reads at times like a boy's own adventure, a tale of pluck that bridged 2 vastly different eras, the imperial splendour of the late Victorian Edwardian period, and the upheaval of the First World War and its aftermath. This was also perhaps the last time in history that a man could live one life in one country, and then wipe the slate clean and live another life in another country, concealing his past from his family. An examination of Harry's life and voluminous writings reveals much of interest. He was, for instance, an eyewitness to the gold rush in the American West in the 1880s, recording the harsh life on the frontier. A self-made publisher, he pioneered the organization of railway workers in America, rallying them to vote for William McKinley as president in 1896. Inspired by his adopted country, Harry took up the concept of the special relationship in a provocative book and series of articles, crusading for closer UK-US ties to counter the growing German menace and foster world peace. Returning home to England, Harry was the oldest correspondent at the Western Front during the First World War, wrote a widely praised book about the Battle of the Somme, and earned a knighthood for his efforts. He sparked international controversy by condemning the Olympic Games, seeing more harm than good in the competition's inflaming of nationalism. Finally, Harry's role in the scoop of the century has been overlooked. He was the Earl of Carnarvon's right-hand factotum in Egypt in 1923, as the tomb of the fabled boy king Tutankhamun was revealed. Whether Harry, who died 7 years later, succumbed to the notorious curse is debatable. The world Harry lived in is long past, but it is an age which left much on the table, with issues that resonate to this day. Seen through a contemporary lens, Harry's experiences are eerily familiar. As a young immigrant to the United States, he faced discrimination yet persevered. As a publisher, he harnessed the emerging mass media to organize workers into voters, tactics which have characterized elections to this day. While he was passionately opposed to labor unions, a distrust that lingers, Harry was committed to a fair deal for workers and a mutually beneficial relationship with their bosses. The aforementioned special relationship was an obsession of Harry's. His determination to wrest Britain away from Europe identifies him as a kind of Brexiteer. Harry called attention to the natural world, advocating for animal protection and condemning destruction of the environment. As his cherished British Empire waned, Harry clung to hopes for a peaceful transition among nations. Finally, listeners will sympathise with Harry's struggle as a husband and father to provide for his family and connect with his only son amid a fast-changing culture. As a young man, Harry sought fame and fortune in the New World, exploiting every opportunity, no matter the cost. He was a master of reinvention, and each of the 9 lives he assumed to escape from one situation into the next is the focus of a chapter in this biography. First, he is an innocent abroad, a wide-eyed junior reporter in the New World, whose natural talent for writing leads to a series of big breaks and grand adventure on the western frontier. Next, as a tycoon in training, Harry moves at breakneck speed to establish himself as a newspaper publisher in his own right, while engaging in the social life of Minneapolis, becoming an American citizen, marrying well, and acquiring immense wealth. This leads him to Chicago, where, as a junior kingmaker, he dabbles in politics, writes a provocative novel about the labor movement, and plays a vital role in the election of a new president. Then the fulcrum tips, and Harry, despite being at the pinnacle of power and prestige, inexplicably abandons everything, including his wife, and returns home, starting life anew as a London bookman, running a publishing house where he discovers a promising new American author named Jack London. The business, however, is a spectacular failure. Harry loses everything and is forced to start over, becoming a man of the times as a roving reporter. It proves to be a perfect fit, and Harry travels the globe, often leaving his second wife and child behind. He also writes more novels and a seminal work on US-UK relations that wins acclaim on both sides of the Atlantic. Despite his age, 55 in 1914, and uncertain health, Harry becomes the oldest war correspondent emerging with a knighthood and considerable physical and psychological trauma. With bills to pay and a family to support, Harry agrees to be a world traveller for the Times, reporting from America, the French Riviera, and India. And if that were not enough, in 1923 he has the scoop of the new century as a tut factotum, reporting on the Carter-Carnarvon roadshow in Egypt. Finally, his twilight years reveal Harry as an elder statesman, a man increasingly out of sync with a changing world, but still full of feisty opinions, setting off a firestorm by calling for an end to the Olympic Games. Harry's incredible journey unfolds in the context of his equally adventurous and accomplished Anglo-Indian family, headed by a clergyman-turned-editor from whom Harry and his 2 brothers inherited a gift for writing, a charming demeanour, and a strong work ethic. His aunt, Margaret Pennington, was a suffragist and personal friend of both Disraeli and Gladstone. Brother Philip was a dashing foreign correspondent, arrested as a spy in Cuba during the Spanish-American War, and editor of the London Sunday Times, who abandoned his wife and children for an eccentric Australian gold mine owner nicknamed Princess Midas. Brother Edward, K., gave Rudyard Kipling his first writing job, and later founded the British Empire Naturalists Association. His sister, Valence, an erstwhile feminist, descended into madness and ended her days, according to family legend, living in a barrel on a roadside in Bulawayo, happily greeting passers-by. In fact, each family member is worthy of their own biography. The youngest of 6 children, Harry was inspired by his siblings and, in later years, came to their rescue in time of need. As the runt of the litter, his life could have unfolded in one of 2 ways. He could have simply coasted unnoticed through life, resting on the laurels of his family. Certainly no one would have predicted that he was destined for greatness when he graduated from Oxford at the very bottom of his class, with seemingly no direction other than to cast off for a foreign land in search of adventure. Instead, Harry took the other path. His dogged perseverance and strong convictions revealed an unseen maturity and confidence which propelled him forward in the New World, where he stood out as a sympathetic foreigner with unbridled curiosity and a knack for leadership. A newspaper in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in 1896 described Harry, then traversing the country as part of the McKinley presidential campaign, as one of those blooming British dudes who find their opportunity in the United States, where there are no vexatious class distinctions to offend their pride. Mr. Robinson is a naturalized citizen with a Cockney accent. In America, Harry found his voice and the courage to speak out. He was not afraid to be provocative, and his views on labor, the environment, international relations, and war were remarkably prescient. Yet he could also be reactionary, particularly when fighting for the survival of an empire that was in twilight, and the world he had known which was disappearing before his eyes. From the White House to Buckingham Palace, the American West to the Western Front, the sands of Egypt to the shores of India, the boardroom to the bedroom, we shine a bright light on a grand life lived in history's shadow, filled with the joys of service and the promotion of world peace, as well as the sorrows of a man conflicted, a loner with an inaccessible interior life that kept him from getting close to anyone, even his wife and son. Harry's wanderlust was a blessing and a curse, but it made for a splendid adventure. Fortunately for the biographer, he was a prolific and engaging writer, a keen observer of human nature and events, a latter-day Tocqueville. It is within the context of his lively newspaper articles, works of fiction and non-fiction, diaries and memoirs, and private letters, that Harry's story unfolds. Introduction. The English Family Robinson. When Julian Robinson embarked on a cruise to India in 1845, he packed 12 dozen white shirts. Yes, 12 dozen, Harry recounted in his memoir. It was sure to take 90 or 100 days at best, and a little trouble in rounding the Cape might easily stretch it to 150 days or more. So, for a bridegroom who was something of a dandy, 144 shirts were none too many. And there was life in India to be considered afterwards. Like father, like son. To understand the life and character of Harry Perry Robinson, something of a dandy himself, we need first to examine his father, head of a rather extraordinary Anglo-Indian family. When Julian Robinson, a young curate in Doncaster, married Harriet Woodcock Sharp, daughter of the Vicar of Doncaster and Canon of York, in 1844, their sea voyage to India was also their honeymoon. 12 dozen white shirts were only the beginning. What a business was the providing of a trousseau for a girl going to India to be married, all the clothes to be made. Did not every woman in India look to the last arriving bride for the latest note in fashions? And all the toilet articles. 6 dozen bottles of toilet vinegar, 6 dozen bottles of lavender water, and everything else to scale, Harry continued. For people did not go to India then for a winter's trip, when the voyage alone might occupy 12 months there and back. And whatever of English comforts they wished to have around them in their bungalow must be taken from England. Thus began the voyage of a newly minted English family Robinson, an experience that would shape not only the newlyweds, but their offspring. Service to the Empire and loyalty to the Crown were virtues instilled by Julian in each of his 6 children. Julian's personal motto was droit et adroit, right and clever, a replacement for the Robinson family motto, virtute non verbis, deeds not words. Perhaps he did not think virtute non verbis too well suited to a clergyman. Words, after all, are a good deal to a preacher, Harry surmised. However, always doing good but with a creative flair became a Robinson hallmark. Julian Robinson was born in 1819, the son of a property speculator who gambled away his fortune and ended his days as head of the Royal Gardens at Kew. While still in that office, he is said to have gone more or less insane, his grandson Harry recalled. At Bruce Castle School in Tottenham, Julian met Percy Florence Shelley, son of Percy Bysshe and Mary Shelley, and they became lifelong friends. Together they went to Cambridge, Julian to Jesus College, Percy to Trinity. Neither distinguished themselves in their studies. My father and Shelley had both narrowly escaped being sent down from Cambridge for bringing down from London a whole Italian opera troupe to give a single performance, Harry explained. Apart from the disapproval of the authorities, his half-share in the expense, I believe, embarrassed my father dreadfully to the end of his college days. Julian spent his holidays with the Shelleys at Boscombe or touring with them on the continent. He seems to have been regarded almost as a ward of the family, Harry noted. After Cambridge, Julian became a minister in the Church of England. Why he went into the church at all I have never been understood, nor has anyone been able to expound to me, Harry wrote. He did not remain actively in the ministry for very long. He was assigned as a curate in Doncaster, assisting the Reverend John Sharp. There he met and fell in love with Harriet, one of Sharp's 11 children, 2 years his junior. Evidently the Robinson family line owned the advowson to the parish church in Charmouth, on the Dorset coast. Julian, as an ordained minister, was entitled to take up this appointment and living. Harry was perplexed as to why his father turned it down. It seemed to me so sweet a spot that I wondered why my parents preferred the adventures and chances of an Indian army chaplaincy in those hazardous days, he wrote. Seeking adventure and the unexpected, we shall hear, was a Robinson trait, not to mention the desire to escape. So, in 1845, Julian accepted a commission as a chaplain in the Honourable East India Company's army service, and he and his bride sailed from Blackwall, London. A large party of family and friends saw them off, as recalled Harriet's younger sister Margaret, who took a shine to Percy Shelley. My sister and her new husband had never seen the polka danced, she said, and Shelley and I had to give a demonstration of it in the ship's cabin. Not an easy thing to do with a dance that needs so much room as the polka. The voyage took 5 months, and soon upon arrival in India their first child, Agnes Harriet, was born. The Robinsons would have 5 more children. Philip Stuart, born 1847, Mary Frances, 1849, Valerie Amy, 1853, Edward Kay, 1855, and Harry Perry, 1859. In 1851, Harriet brought her first 2 children home to England, leaving them in Dursley, Gloucestershire, in charge of a schoolmaster. In 1859, unaware she was pregnant with Harry, Harriet brought Mary, Valerie, known as Valence, and Edward, known as Kay, to England, and all 5 children were entrusted to the care of a second cousin in New Brighton, Merseyside. Harry was born on November 30th, 1859. The birth was likely at sea en route back to India, although Harry always claimed to have been born in Chunar. Harriet's last journey home to England was in 1861, with young Harry, and she and the 6 children made their home in Cheltenham. Julian would join them a decade later, upon his retirement. In India, the Robinsons were based in Chunar, in the northwestern provinces, Uttar Pradesh today, between Benares and Mirzapur, where Julian served as chaplain at the large military station. The Reverend Julian was a popular figure, often depicted in the local press. Of those first years in India I must have heard many stories, but all are blotted out by one incident. So rapturous to a child, Harry recalled. They were going, my father and mother, along some hill path in the rickshaws of the day, when they met a party of natives, 3 of whom were carrying on their backs large baskets full of grapes. My father thought a grape would be pleasant, so he stopped his rickshaw and, mindful of the price of grapes then in England, handed one of the hillmen a rupee with a request for the value in grapes. Whereupon, one after another, they emptied their baskets on the ground before him. An unbroken rupee was a larger sum of money than perhaps they had ever handled in their lives. It was a period of unrest and uncertainty on the subcontinent, and in his memoir Harry recounted the story of the family's narrow escape during the 1857 Indian Mutiny, 2 years before Harry was born. Harriet was on a visit to Mirzapur with her 3 children, Mary, Valence, and Kay, when trouble broke out. There were 11 of them, all women and children, crowded in one vehicle, presumably a gharry. So loaded were they that my sister Mary had to sit on the step hanging on by one hand, with the baby Kay hugged in her lap with the other arm. They drove as fast as might be by night. By day they were hidden in the woods. One night, in the grey of the early morning, they were stopped by an English schoolmaster and his wife, who came out of hiding and begged to be taken on board. It was impossible. The horse was worn out, the gharry overloaded, and the native driver refused. They must either find another vehicle or make their way on foot to safety. A few hours later they were cut to pieces by mutineers who came along the road. Harry recalled visiting his father's church in Chunar while on a visit to India in 1921, his first time back in the subcontinent. No service had been held in that church for 50 years. The caretaker brought out from storage Julian's books. They were to me extraordinarily interesting, page after page, beautifully neat, in my father's handwriting. 65 years old, he wrote. The earliest entries, each Sunday and holy day throughout the years, with every detail recorded in the ruled columns, the name of the officiating clergyman, the name of the preacher, his text, the numbers of the hymns, etc. And through all the long period no name occurred, either officiating clergyman or preacher, but Julian Robinson. Apparently he never had relief. Nor, Harry observed, were there any references to hints of warfare and peril and the need of steadfastness, which his father must have incorporated in his preaching. On its face the record runs as smoothly as that of any dozing English vicarage in a season of unbroken peace, he wrote. Harry added that his father had written a pamphlet on Julian the Apostate, although no copy has survived. The writing of it seems to have been a whimsical performance, he noted. Inevitably he became known as Julian the Apostate himself, especially when he left the church. To the surprise of many, in 1865, Julian refused an offer to become the Bishop of Calcutta, and at the age of 46, retired from ecclesiastical life to run an English-language newspaper in Allahabad, the Pioneer. Harry insisted that his father was not defrocked. He continued to be called Reverend, and did occasionally officiate at services. As was said of him at the time, he only transferred his preaching from the pulpit to the editorial chair. The Pioneer was founded in 1865 by George Allen, an English businessman who had made his fortune in tea, boots, and shoes. It was initially published 3 days a week, then became a daily. It was modelled in format, layout, and typeface on the London Times. No one has ever questioned that it was to Julian Robinson that its instantaneous success and the great power which it soon came to exercise were owing, Harry recalled. George Allen, who furnished the capital, though an excellent businessman, had not and never pretended to any literary ability or other qualification for journalism. He was, by all accounts, a gentle, ladylike, unimpressive little man in those days, who, after she came out to keep house for my father, was extremely anxious to marry my sister Valence. They did not marry. Together, Allen and Robinson, considered an independent-minded clergyman with similar political views, became known in Anglo-Indian parlance as Old Coyhe, experienced India hands who knew the ropes and held deeply conservative, not to say reactionary, views on all matters pertaining to British rule in India. In the pages of the Pioneer they gave voice to both their own prejudices and those of the majority of their readers in northern India. planters, box swallows, businessmen, engineers, Europeans in the provincial services, and junior officers in the ranks of the Indian Army. They not only provided the Indian and European news that their readers wanted, but went to great lengths to be first with it, employing the best news services available. Not everything in The Pie was reactionary, however. One article, on the salaries of native civilians, supported the efforts of natives who agitated for increased pay and better living standards. A plea is made for the natives to be allowed to rise in civilization, material as well as moral, ere anything like a free, friendly intercourse between the dominant and the subject classes can take place, the article stated. Within the context of British rule, Julian and other civic leaders were not averse to keeping the peace by improving conditions for all peoples. Liberal views like these, but within the status quo, were passed on by Julian to his youngest son. The Pioneer also expanded to include poetry, fiction, and book reviews. In 1877, Allen acquired a rival daily newspaper, the Civil and Military Gazette, which, along with the Pioneer, were considered mouthpieces for British and official opinion. Of course, I knew something of the space which my father had for many years filled in Indian eyes, Harry recalled. Lord Roberts had told me that he was the greatest man in India in his day, and how often I had heard the same thing from others. If a man had lived in India during the third quarter of the last century, and on meeting him I hinted at my relationship, the response was always eager and immediate. "What, you are not Julian Robinson's son?" Field Marshal Frederick Sleigh Roberts, 1st Earl Roberts, commander in India and later the Boer War, stayed in Julian's bungalow when in Allahabad, and they became fast friends. It was indeed a current witticism that India was not governed from Calcutta, but from Robinson's bungalow in Allahabad, Harry noted. In 1873, Julian resigned as editor of The Pioneer and returned to England for good. He was 54 years old, and Harry was 14. Interestingly, his two eldest sons, Phil and Kay, followed in his footsteps. Phil returned to India in 1868, aged 21, to assist his father on The Pioneer and dabble in fiction. In 1871, Phil founded The Chameleon, an Anglo-Indian periodical of light literature, printed on the same presses as The Pioneer. When Julian retired, Phil briefly succeeded his father as editor of The Pioneer, but was happier as a freelance writer and naturalist. He left India in 1877 to join the London Daily Telegraph as a war correspondent, journeying to Afghanistan, 1878-9, Zululand, 1879, Egypt, 1882, and Sudan, 1885. After a few years as a freelance journalist and editor of The Sporting Times, Kay arrived in India in 1884 when he was 29, to work as assistant editor of The Pioneer, and later as editor of the Civil and Military Gazette. Kay's assistant was a talented young man named Rudyard Kipling. Friends from the start, Kay encouraged his charge to write short stories, which he published. Harry's son, John Bradstreet, Brad, Perry Robinson, born 1906, recalled the oft-repeated story of Kipling's antics in the Gazette office. His Uncle Kay, he noted, always kept a large black umbrella in his office. This was because Kipling would suddenly have a brilliant idea and would rush into the editor's room waving his pen. Pens in those days were full of black ink, and the editor was always dressed in whites. The umbrella was opened wide as soon as the brilliant idea got through the door. After his retirement, Julian returned to India only once, donning his clerical hat to serve as a chaplain to Edward, Prince of Wales, on his Indian tour in 1875-6. While there, Julian also filed reports for The Pioneer. Among his fellow journalists was George A. Henty, representing the London Evening Standard, and who would go on to write 9 stirring adventure novels set in India. It is unclear if Julian joined the Prince for the entire 17-week trip, which covered 7,500 miles. Along the way, Julian introduced the Prince to Christian missionaries and schools, and read service on several occasions, whether in camp or inside a palace. when the principal chaplain...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?